Hello. Thank you for joining us for a discussion about securing and retaining great talent. We are going to spend the next hour talking about challenges in recruiting and retention and steps that you can take to overcome them. For those who are joining us live, we are celebrating a few holidays today: National Solitaire Day, Bitcoin Pizza Day. I'm not sure what toppings go on a Bitcoin pizza. It's a mystery, and that's why today is also Sherlock Holmes Day. I'm honored to be joined today by two extremely well-respected thought leaders in their respective industries, Amanda Scott and Annissa Deshpande.
And I'm excited to be here, too.
As am I.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're going to talk about the advantages of considering the talent market as a B2C market, steps that you can take to differentiate yourselves from competition so that you can attract and retain the best possible talent. And finally, what are the legal considerations that employers face, and how can companies blend those legal considerations with best practices? But before we get started, I want to introduce the colleagues who have graciously given their time today. Amanda Scott is the president of Solution Harbor. She is an exceptionally well-regarded thought leader in the world of recruiting. She is a dedicated retained recruiter who works with her clients to find the best available employees. The roles that she fills are often for key employees in companies. In more than 17 years, she has never had to use her replacement guarantee on a single placement. That's quite a testimonial to her due diligence and her ability to clearly understand the positions she's filling. She helps companies navigate the challenging world of recruitment in a seamless, time-tested, and collaborative process. Annissa heads Loglab, and she is an organizational strategist who helps companies increase profitability by reducing turnover and creating an environment where people love to work. She navigates the different cultures and generations in doing so. She helps her clients grow revenue by creating modern people strategies which lead to competitive advantages. She takes a broad view based on her 20-plus years of experience in HR, IT, finance, and strategy, and she has a proven track record of advancing companies' strategic, operational, and financial goals. Briefly, I have extensive experience in employment law and human resources. My HR practice is devoted to helping companies stay out of trouble by taking proactive measures, including drafting policies, training, conducting equal pay and diversity and inclusion analysis, auditing employee exemptions and pay practices, and reviewing websites for things like ADA compliance. And when they get in trouble, I'm a firefighter, and I help them get out of trouble. So let's get started. Amanda, can you talk about some recruiting trends, please?
Absolutely. So we still remain in an incredibly tight job market. I checked this morning, and across the United States, unemployment is at 3.6%. So we're still at a very low unemployment rate. By and large, most businesses across the country are doing well. They treat their employees well, and it keeps those employees engaged and happy. I think more and more companies are starting to realize they need to focus on better benefits, better employee training, and, really companies that sort of get it are really implementing all kinds of tactics to keep their employees happy. Skilled employees, management, executive, it doesn't matter what level. I think all employees are in high demand. Also something to keep in mind, we're in a unique time frame right now in that we lose about 10,000 baby boomers a day to retirement. So that's a pretty big chunk of our workforce. So not only, do the numbers speak to this, but just as a recruiter, I can give you an example. When I'm working on a search for a client, if I reach out to 100 candidates that are passive, in other words, not advertising anywhere that they're looking for a new job, just passive, happy employees. If I reach out to 100, I would estimate that I get about 15 to 20 responses. So that tells me, 80 to 85% of employees are generally happy where they're working. Something else to think about with this tight job market is when people are in high demand, candidates can get more than one offer. So often what happens is I will engage with a passive candidate who was heads down enjoying their job. They get a call from me, a recruiter. They start to engage with me on an opportunity and start to interview with a client of mine. And now I've planted a seed in their mind that they're worth something. And they're starting to think, wow, this recruiter thinks I'm great, so maybe I should look elsewhere. So they may get another offer even if they were a passive candidate. And I would say half of the deals I've worked on in the past 2 to 3 years, half of the candidates have received a counteroffer from their current employer. So one really great way to navigate this is to engage with a recruiter that can help you kind of navigate those multiple offers. And we'll talk more later in the webinar about some other tactics that you can use to be competitive when you do give an offer. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is everything is public information these days. You know, everyone's heard of Glassdoor, of course. Anyone that's been an employee can post there, but, you know, there's countless apps that I don't even know all of the names of. We have Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and countless others. So any person, whether they are an employee or a candidate going through a recruiting process with your company, they can post on any of these sites and talk about their experience. And of course, then people talk to each other, you know, whether they're neighbors or former colleagues or meet each other at a grocery store, their kids go to school together. People talk to each other. And, you know, the saying, birds of a feather flock together. I mean, people that work for tech companies tend to hang out with people that work for tech companies. People that work in HR have friends that are in HR, and on and on. So you really want to be careful how your company's presence comes across, because anything that happens can and will be made public.
Amanda, thank you so much. That's really very, very interesting, and some good things for people to think about as we go through the webinar. Annissa, how about on your end?
Sure. Thanks, David. So I often ask my clients, what if one of the tech giants came to your town and started targeting talent in your industry? Do you think that your top talent would stay or go? And at first, everyone seemed a bit surprised by the question, but more and more people are realizing that this could be a reality as they've seen how Google and Amazon are disrupting markets and managing to attract the best talent regardless of industry. So regardless, the tech giants are raising the bar when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. And, you know, I often tell my clients that the good news is that you can definitely compete, as, you know, Amanda also referenced. And it's not going to take things like free food or ping pong tables, but you do need to develop a modern HR strategy that's grounded in your business goals and differentiates your company in a compelling way. HR has a tendency to be very compliance-focused, and I continue to hear from overwhelmed executives that they need HR to be more of a trusted advisor at the table who's building strategies that specifically achieve business goals. So whether it's ensuring that companies have the right talent for future needs, getting ahead of talent trends through predictive means, or experimenting with technologies to provide a competitive advantage, or even fundamentally rethinking the employee experience to really excite employees about the work they're doing. And more, I think the time is right for being creative and thinking out of the box. CEOs and other business executives increasingly tell me that they're concerned that they don't have the right skills to sustain or grow their business and are clamoring for new ways to reduce turnover and retain top talent. And that's why I'm a big believer in thinking about the talent market like a B2C market. You know, HR needs to start approaching the process of identifying and retaining talent the same way that consumer-facing companies think about acquiring and servicing their customers. They've really got to focus on what's unique about their service offering and target people that fit that need. So those are the key retention trends that I think we're working with, I should say.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk on the legal side. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. No, actually, I should call it a David Downer. We're talking about better ways to recruit the best talent, while at the same time there are a bunch of states that have come up with laws that govern what you can and cannot ask in the interview process. For example, Massachusetts, and I know a couple of my colleagues in Massachusetts are on the webinar today, but Massachusetts has a law that says you cannot ask about things like salary and benefit history during the interview process. That's been eliminated because of the fact that, unfortunately, when people consider how much you're making when making an offer for a future job, and women are making a lot less than men, it's going to continue to keep women at a lower salary basis than men. In fact, there's a day called Equal Pay Day, which this year I believe was April 2nd, and that's the number of days in 2019 that women had to work to earn as much as men earned in 2018. So in several states, and this is a growing trend, and there's legislation pending in a bunch of other states, you can't ask about things like salary benefit history. And it's important to actually take a moment, grab your writing stick. What's a writing stick? Actually, a pen or a pencil, and jot down that if you've got any kind of an online portal, make sure in that portal you're not asking salary and benefit history when you do recruiting, if you're doing your own recruiting in that area. And recruiters like Amanda keep current on these regs, so it's really important if you work with somebody that they know what's going on. And pay equity is something that's also on the radar at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So in 2019, as of right now, come the end of September, you're going to need to file EEO-1 reports that include and number of hours worked. And for the first time, this will be a very clear snapshot if you've got working in a company where there are problems and there is disparity in pay based on gender, based upon race, based upon national origin. And at the moment, it looks like the information that will be provided will be for 2 years, not just 1 year, but 2 years history of pay data and hours worked, broken down by job categories, gender, race, national origin. So I think it's a real important thing for you to put in the back of your minds. So what we talked about doing is having a healthy panel discussion. And the first thing that I'd like to throw out, and that is we hit on some trends over the last couple of minutes, and I'm wondering whether you see them as broad trends or do you see them in some other light? For example, are these trends mostly impacting tech companies, smaller, larger companies, or are they across the board? Amanda, would you mind going first?
Absolutely. So I am really seeing this everywhere. I, as a recruiter, work across a variety of different industries: technology, service, manufacturing, consumer goods, medical device. I really work across a variety of industries, and I see it everywhere. It affects small companies. It affects large companies. Annissa kind of alluded to this earlier. Big companies tend to have better benefits, compensation. They have better packages. So that can be an issue for small companies that are trying to either recruit out of big companies or don't want to lose their current employees to larger companies. So we'll talk about this more, but there are ways to get creative with benefits. But I also see, large companies can have an issue with things like employee engagement. Sometimes people that work at very large companies, I have candidates tell me all the time that work for a large company that they would prefer to work for a smaller company where they can really be hands-on. So again, kind of figuring out what your company's strengths are and using that when you are recruiting and retaining employees. So again, I see it across. This affects all businesses. I haven't seen a single exception.
Annissa, how about you?
I mean, I agree with Amanda. These trends are across the board. Even the small family-owned business whose controller retires after 25 years and now needs to be replaced is struggling to find the right replacement, and it only seems to be getting worse. And I think part of the challenge is that companies have accepted turnover as part of the cost of doing business But we're hitting this point of what if you can't replace the turnover? Amanda referenced the unemployment rate earlier. We're really at a 50-year low in unemployment, and nearly everyone's employed. So the cost to recruit someone from a job they're already in is really going to be very expensive. So if you want top talent, it's going to come at an even higher premium. And more CEOs are starting to realize that they can't recruit their way out of these situations and really have to start thinking about how they're going to build their own skill sets. So definitely across the board, across every industry, as Amanda referenced as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. In my world, people ask me to talk about war stories, and I've had a bunch of interesting scenarios that deal with companies going through a lot of turnover, but one company really comes to mind as having employees running for the exits with a bad taste in their mouths, and they brought in some new people to try to fix it. And for the first couple of weeks, the person I was dealing with the most referred to it as Groundhog Day, because it seemed like almost every day someone was coming in, they were dissatisfied, the morale was down, and the employee engagement was down, the brand was suffering. So Annissa, I'll throw it at you first. What are successful companies doing to get ahead of these kinds of trends? Can you talk about what you both have recommended to clients to prevent or improve these situations? Maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Sure. And I think it's a great question. Successful companies are really focusing on what makes them unique, and then they're amplifying it. These companies crave feedback from, Amanda mentioned Glassdoor, from sites like Glassdoor, so they can really figure out what people are saying about them and how to make it better. This is stuff that's unvarnished. It's not asked through a series of specific questions like you get in an engagement survey. They then take that information and they compare their scores to their competitors and make a conscious effort to figure out how to set themselves apart from their competitors and about the best way to service and empower employees. These are also the companies that are being really intentional about their culture. They understand that the culture has to be authentic and reflected in everything that they do. So, for example, one of my favorite examples actually is Netflix. It says that they claim that they don't train employees, and I know a lot of you guys have probably seen that Netflix culture deck, but one of the things they're very explicit about is they simply don't train employees. They're upfront about that at the time of hire, but working at Netflix, you're going to get enough on-the-job training where you're going to grow. And so they set that expectation up front so employees don't walk in with an expectation of, I'm going to get training outside of on-the-job type work. Companies that do this well are also moving away from what I call hierarchical and even policing type cultures to those where they really treat people like adults and humans. They're looking for ways to better integrate their employees' personal lives into their work lives so employees don't feel like they have to choose between one or the other. And they're demanding that everyone treats all employees with respect and dealing with situations head on where things aren't working. We've seen the impacts of the Me Too movement and how I would say how expansive it is, how many companies it touched, how many people came out of the woodwork once this started to happen. And so I think companies are becoming much more aware of dealing with these issues head on. And this goes back to what Amanda had talked about earlier about everything being public these days, right? Anything that goes wrong in a company is all of a sudden put out there for everyone to see on social media, Glassdoor, whatever it may be. So companies have to be really careful about how they deal with these situations so it doesn't come back to bite them later.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much. Amanda?
So kind of echoing some of the things that Annissa said, I mean, I actually think employee surveys are a good idea. I met with a potential client recently, and I asked him how engaged do you think your employees are? How happy are they? And he said, I think 80% of them are happy and engaged. And I said, well, how do you know that? He goes, well, I'm just guessing. So I do think, employee surveys, exit interviews can be really helpful. Glassdoor, of course, if you have access to that information, use it. If you don't, find a way to get it. And then really take to heart what your employees are telling you. What is their feedback? What would make the company better? I've often heard companies, when I've gone to talk to them about their hiring needs, and I look at Glassdoor before I go meet with any company. By the way, that's something else to think about. Your service providers look at your Glassdoor too before they come to meet with you. But I've gone to companies and said, every Glassdoor review you have is bad, and the company says, well, it's disgruntled employees that are putting that information out on Glassdoor. Well, it might be, but they did leave or were fired or, whatever the case may be. So I think if you can use information, information is power, right? So if you can use the feedback that you're getting from employees about what's not working and use that to make things work better, I think that is a good approach.
Great, thank you. On the scenario I was talking about, this actually came to me because the CEO of the company, in his infinite wisdom, or maybe lack thereof, sent a text message. He says only was supposed to go to a couple of friends, but actually to all of his employees. That was a rather graphic and vulgar image of a female with no clothing. And that led to some people bringing a claim, and that's when I was brought in to help us to put the fire out and then to try to help them just reinvent themselves. But the perception of the employees was really, really bad. The way they viewed the company, the management, they were at a point where they just thought that nobody cared. So one of the things I did at the time with this company, and this may sound kind of stupid to you guys, but they had a sales team that was really disengaged. And we were having a conversation, and this was sometime June, early July of that particular year. And I said to the leadership, why don't you give some resources, give some tools to the salespeople? So, for example, each salesperson identify 10 targets, 10 companies they can pursue to sell their goods. Do a little research. Go online. As Amanda and Annissa have said, everything's out there on the Internet. Figure out what college they went to. Get a baseball cap for that college. Come up with a handwritten note. Have someone double-check the note to make sure that the message is good and it's appropriate. Send that out and say, here's a little something for you. Can I please have 15 minutes of your time? And the reaction I got was, we don't want to spend that kind of money on baseball caps. That's a lot of money. And I said, you're talking about if you go to a retailer and you say, I'm going to pick up, I forget what the number was, 120 or 150 caps for my sales team, they're going to probably give it to you pretty close to cost. Any one sale would more than pay for it. And they did it, and the perception started to shift. The second thing they did is they started to do things like weekly and monthly employee of the week, employee of the month, and things like that started to shift the perception that this company actually is trying to care about its people and trying to give them a culture where people can succeed. So let's jump on to another topic. And can you talk to me more about why we need to reframe our thinking around talent? Why do you believe that companies need to view the talent market as a B2C market? Amanda, you're on the hot seat.
So I think there's two ways to look at this. One is the financial aspect. I mean, it would be complicated, but I would encourage each and any of you to look at the turnover you've had in your company, just say even over the last year, and what it's cost your company in loss of productivity. You know, how many, if a manager or director or VP left, how many of that person's employees then left shortly after? Really look from a financial aspect at the effect of turnover. I mean, if you can prevent that, you could potentially be saving your company a lot of money. Now, the side that really speaks more to my personality and my beliefs is the human side of this. These employees are human beings. And more often than not, if you're recruiting someone in this job market, they're leaving a job and coming to work for your company. So if you can set them up to be as successful, happy, engaged, and healthy as possible, why wouldn't you want to? You know, we should really I think that sometimes we get caught up in focusing so much on the financial aspect of things that we forget our employees or potential employees in terms of candidates are human beings with feelings. And, the happier they are, the better they do, the better your company will do.
Great. Thank you. Annissa.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of following on that, in the knowledge economy, talent is really your competitive advantage. And so you don't want your competitive advantage walking out the door, as Amanda said. And when you see that the competition for that talent is super fierce and only getting tougher, you've got to do something different. And so that's why I think it's really important to reframe your thinking around this. You already see this happening at some of the leading companies, I hate to keep going back to the tech giants, but they're just changing the way that companies recruit and retain talent, and they're continuing to come up with new and innovative ways to attract and retain talent. All of the work that other companies do around attracting and retaining customers, and they're applying it to talent, and that's why they're ahead of everybody else. And then you have sites like Glassdoor, which we've talked about a lot today, but they're shifting the dynamic of the marketplace. I always tell people Glassdoor is the Yelp of companies, and 70% of people now look to reviews before they make decisions on where to apply. And most of those job applicants read 6 reviews before forming an opinion about a company. So if your competitors for talent have better ratings and reviews than you do, your top talent, or the top talent in your industry, is probably applying to go work somewhere else. So you've got to reframe your thinking to compete in this type of environment.
That's great. It's almost, and this may sound simplistic, but a free agent in a sport is going to decide where to play ball in the next season. And they're going to consider a whole lot of things, not just salary, but a lot of other things. And it's really the same thing for any kind of talent. And if you want to do great things, you've got to get the best people in the door. So we've talked about this. We've talked about some trends. And I'm wondering, what can companies do to get ahead of these trends? Some good ideas to get people to start to think this in a different way. Annissa, you want to kick it off, please?
Sure. At first I think it's what I referenced earlier. You need to shift the mindset to think about talent the way you think about customers. And then the second thing I think that companies really need to do now is modernize their HR to become much more proactive, data-driven, and creative. Unfortunately, too many HR professionals look for best practices when it comes to the talent market. And I always tell people that best practices only get you to the level of your competitor. And think about it. If you haven't differentiated your service offering or your talent offering from your competitors, why would an employee or candidate be attracted to your company? The other thing that I really try to hit on is employee experience. It's everything these days, right? And companies have to adopt this mindset. I tell my clients all the time, when was the last time that you had to sit through a training to use a mobile phone app? Never, right? They're built to be intuitive. And companies need to adopt the same experience with their programs, systems, and services, or they won't get adopted. They have to figure out how to seamlessly integrate all of these things into an employee's busy workday so the employee can focus on the core work and getting things done and being productive. And what this really means is that the what's in it for me needs to be clear to employees, and it needs to just, again, seamlessly integrate into their busy workday, and the value has to be crystal clear. Companies also need to look at their business strategy and figure out the key organizational and team gaps that are preventing them from achieving those goals, and they've actively got to build a plan to close them. And they need to start thinking about creative ways to use data and analytics to predict talent market and employee trends, the same way that marketing does with consumers, thinking about using data to figure out consumer preferences, what they're going to do next, where the market's going to go, so they really can build the offerings that are going to retain those customers over a long period of time.
That's great. Amanda?
So I agree with everything that you just said, Annissa, and I think that you and I might differ a little bit on some of the things I'm about to share, but I think in addition to really focusing on your HR strategy, I really think that companies need to think about what are they what's the sell? Why would a candidate want to come and work for your company? When I go to meet with a potential client, I ask them, what are some unique or special things about their company? And more often than not, the client says to me, I don't know, or we don't have anything. And so then I really dig into, how do you manage the company? How are you reviewing your employees? Tell me about your benefits. One thing about benefits, if your benefits are lacking, if it's, expensive health insurance or, lacking a 401k plan, whatever those things are, there's so many ways to be creative with benefits these days. If you're a smaller company, of course, you can do a PEO program. I mean, there's just a number of ways to improve your benefits that don't necessarily cost more than what you're paying. Another thing that, this is the part that I think Annissa and I might disagree on, is that doing little things at the company that don't cost much or sometimes don't cost anything can be really attractive to potential candidates. Doing things like maybe letting people go home early on a Friday, or having a yoga instructor come and teach a class once a week on site, or having a company planned community event. Maybe it's to feed the homeless or do a walk or a half marathon together, something of that nature. Those things make candidates or employees feel like they're really part of a community. And then again, kind of hearkening back to what Annissa has mentioned a couple of times, figuring out what is unique about your company and sell that to the candidate. A candidate is a potential customer for you. So as you're recruiting them and they're going through your interview process, you constantly have to be selling them on what you're doing that's special, what's unique about your company, and how they as an employee would contribute to the overall mission of your company.
Oh, thank you both. I'm going to jump in on this one also, if it's okay with the two of you. And I'll start with the last thing that Amanda said, and that is you've got to sell the company during the interview process, and that is so true. One of the things that's become an issue in some litigation and discord that gets brought to my attention is when the company sells what maybe they think they are or want to be, but not what they are. So it's really important when you do sell that you're selling something that's true, and that's something that is a fiction that is going to create frustration and disappointment from day one when the employee walks in the door and realizes they walked into something very different from what they expected. There have been a bunch of studies done, and what I'm hearing is that employees now want flexibility. They want to buy in and be proud of the core values and the mission of a company. So things like, for example, the community volunteering events, I think do matter. So Amanda, I agree with you on that point. But I'm also mindful of the fact that we've got 4 different generations of employees working, and we've got more diversity in terms of culture in many workplaces than we've ever seen before. And because of that, and at the same time, mind you, we've got the impact of #MeToo, and this pendulum has swung into a very new direction, and it'll be interesting to keep an eye on how this is going to impact trends in a going forward basis. But one of the things I think that's important from my perspective is training. Do training on diversity and inclusion. Do the harassment prevention training, but also start to shift the focus so that when people are trained, we're not going to tell people, I'm going to walk into a room, and let's say, for example, I walk into a room and I've got either Amanda or Annissa in the room. I'm not allowed to notice that they're female. They're not allowed to notice I'm a male and that I'm a middle-aged man. They can't notice that. I can't notice their gender. That's the way we were taught by the EEOC, by the courts for several decades, and that doesn't work because you are going to notice those things. We can't ignore what's right in front of us. The question is, are we going to act on it? And are we going to understand the cultural differences that these people have and they bring to the workforce, and to teach each other to respect those differences and that employees have a voice. And the more we do that, I think we're going to have a competitive advantage if we can figure out a way to do it in one company before other companies do the same thing. So the next, do either of you want to jump on that?
Yeah, could I just add a couple of things?
Sure.
We've talked a lot, and Annissa is probably more of an expert to talk about this than me, but we've talked a lot about HR strategy and modernizing that. I think two really key things that a lot of companies miss. Netflix might disagree with this, but I think effective onboarding is really important. Having a plan for when the person first starts, making sure they have all the training that they need and that they understand what their role is in the company. And then also an effective review process. I think companies have good intentions when it comes to reviews, but I literally just heard from a candidate who told me her quarterly review has been put off for a month. It's been rescheduled 5 times. So she doesn't know where she stands with her company. If the work she's doing is appropriate, she feels very sort of vague about what she's doing. And so I think those are two really key things that companies can do.
And I would add to that. So I first want to address what Amanda said earlier about the little things. I think the little things make a big difference. I'm not advocating that you don't do the little things, but you can't have a toxic culture and think that the little things are going to solve for it. So, as long as it's aligned with the overall culture, I'm all for building community, or having a yoga instructor, or even free food and ping pong tables, as long as it is aligned with the overall culture and it's representative of that. My point on that was that the little things shouldn't, can't make up for the big misses, right? So I was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me that they have an innovative culture, and when it came, and that everybody felt it, except there were these little things that weren't going right. And when we dug into it, their employee handbook was downloaded off of a state website and was a bunch of legalese. And so, they were advocating for freedom with responsibility, but then they had this really strict and difficult to understand way of communicating their policies and procedures. And I also think one more point that I wanted to add to David's point about the training. I think training is super important. I think that we need to kind of shift our mindset about how we train. And I think the importance is that we train on the culture and who we want to be, and by doing that, we'll cover all of the compliance issues. Because if you're treating people right, if you're treating them with respect, if you're teaching people how to work in a diverse environment, you shouldn't see issues. And you're also showing a zero tolerance policy for things that don't go against your culture or people not being treated well. You should see less claims. You should see a reduction in the Me Too type of incidents that happen across your workplace. And I think people will get more engaged in that than some of the more standard sexual harassment training that we tend to see coming out of companies. So I think there's a real opportunity here to kind of build the type of culture that's going to attract the right type of people to your company.
Those are great add-ons. Annissa, quick question. You keep mentioning the free food. Is that when the Bitcoin pizza comes in? Second is, I agree with you on the training, provided there's top-down buy-in. Yep. If employees don't see the top-down buy-in, the perception is going to be it's only a check the box and the company really doesn't care. So, Annissa, I've got a question for you. How do you think the emergent trends, like machine automating work, is going to impact these trends? What can employers and employees do to ready themselves for these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really, really important trends. On the employer side, I think we need to evaluate how these coming trends are going to impact our business and think about where we need to change. And again, I keep harping on this, but this is really an opportunity for HR to be more proactive, to get ahead of these business challenges, and really to preserve the competitive advantage of human capital. And I think this is an opportunity to expand our use of data and analytics. It should really be able to help HR get ahead of strategic shifts, which may be a part of which may make a part of its workforce obsolete, and figure out how to retrain and redeploy the talent so it doesn't lose that institutional knowledge. And I don't see companies doing this. Like, we see a lot of coming trends with truck drivers, for example, and I don't see UPS thinking about, well, how do we retrain these truck drivers that may not have a job 5 years from now as we move to driverless cars. So I think that and these folks may have an ability to contribute to the company in a different way. I don't know what that is, but I think some work needs to be done and some thought needs to be put into that. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that executives, are really sensitive to what happened 20 years ago when they fell behind internet companies that were just more agile and nimble from the start. And when you see these new technologies emerging and new disruptions coming every day, there's just a sense from executives that they don't want to get left behind again, and they're looking to HR to ensure that the organizational is agile and can adapt quickly to changing trends. And then again, on the employer side, I think we need to be much more open to using innovative work models to get things done. So, you have these companies that have just created self-managing workforces like Uber and Lyft, and what can we learn from them? I mean, there's no management structure in the driver pool. They just all kind of sign up for work and work when they want to. So, what are the things that we can take away from that and apply to our own situation to really come up with innovative ways of getting things done in this environment where we have a really tight labor market? And, making sure that we're thinking proactively about how we get just the right skills at the right time for the period of time we need it versus looking at every hire, every person that we're bringing on as a full-time hire. And I think the challenge with these trends is really also on the employee side. I think that, everyone needs to assess the impact of artificial intelligence and other disruptive technologies that have just come out that have surprised us and have integrated into our lives so quickly. And they need to think about, how am I going to stay relevant in this new world? What new skills do I need to learn? How open am I to these new technologies? And what other value can I offer to companies? A lot of times we force people to do kind of routine work when they may be creative and they haven't explored that in a business setting. So I think there's some opportunities to do that. The other thing I would say, or the last thing I would add, is that employees really need to be prepared for constant change and develop a mindset of embracing it as a new norm. So I don't think things are going to be the way, if you think back to what we were doing 5 years ago, it's completely different to what we're doing now. And I think if we look ahead 5 years from now, it's going to be completely different from what we're doing today. So the only thing that's constant is change.
You just made me think of a Twilight Zone episode going way back. There was an episode where Burgess Meredith was somebody who loved books, and they were saying, "You are obsolete. You are obsolete." Funny old episode, but I think there's a lot of fear that people have of change. Is it a new software program? Is it new hardware? Is it a new way of doing things? And there are some people that are scared of change. So if there's a way to help people embrace the change and give them the toolkit, and this goes back to something that Amanda also had said, you need a toolkit to succeed. And I think it's an employer's duty, especially if you want to be competitive, to find and create those toolkits and those mechanisms, because those drivers, maybe they're not driving a truck anymore, but they were interacting with the customer on a regular basis. They've got a value they can add, and I think we don't want to be short-sighted in that regard. So I had another question, and that is, what do you recommend to employers and employees to start making the transition to a B2C mindset? Can we talk about that a bit? And Amanda, perhaps you can go first on this?
Sure. So I had this really fantastic experience in a retail setting 2 years ago, and I have not stopped talking about it. I was at an outlet center that I go to regularly, and I went to a Le Creuset store. It's a French cookware store. This is an outlet, so this is not a department store. This is an outlet, and I needed to buy quite a few things for a new home. The sales gal was incredibly helpful. She was so nice. She asked me what I was doing, really engaged with me. I made my purchase. She helped me carry my packages to my car, And a week later, I got a handwritten thank you note mailed to me from her. I was so impressed. I told all of my friends. I made a Yelp review for her. I posted about it on Facebook and Instagram. And every single time I go to that outlet center, whether I need something from Le Creuset or not, I go into that store. So this, 20-minute experience and thereafter handwritten letter from this woman made such an impact on me. Now, had it been a bad experience, it could have made a big negative experience too. When you are interviewing candidates, you have to think of them as customers. Without customers, your business wouldn't succeed. Without employees and candidates getting a good impression of you, your business won't succeed. So when a candidate comes to interview you, you have to think of it like they're walking into a store. They're looking around. They're seeing how they're treated, what is there to offer. And, if they have a great experience, even if it's a candidate you don't hire, if they have a good experience and feel they were treated well, they'll go and tell their friends. If they have a bad experience and feel they were treated poorly, they will go and tell their friends. So I really think it's just very clear that without great employee relations and great experiences with candidates in recruiting, companies are really shooting themselves in the foot. And again, both Annissa and I have talked about this, and David's mentioned it too. These are human beings that need to be treated with respect and care, just as you would treat your customers. They are equally as important as your customers.
That's a great point. I've heard so many C-suites talk about how important their employees are, and they're only as good as their employees. Well, if that's what you keep saying, talk is nice, but actions really are critical. Annissa?
Yeah, I would agree with both of you, and I would extend what Amanda said when she talked about the importance of the experience during the recruiting process. It needs to continue once the employee comes on board. And, one thing that you can do right away is start looking at your Glassdoor and asking your employees to post honest reviews so you can get a sense of what's going well and the opportunities for improvement. You could take, like I mentioned earlier, you should compare this to what your competitors are doing and see how they're performing, and ask yourself what's unique about you and how you're different from your competitors. And I want to warn you guys, this isn't easy. It's really hard to go and read some of these reviews, and some of them or you hope aren't truthful. It's not for the faint of heart, but you have to address them because that's what is publicly out there about you, and you want to make sure that the people that are reading it know that you're reading it and taking action internally. And overall, you'll be better for it in the long term. And then, I do think that you need to start really looking at how you modernize your HR. And I'm going to give you an example. I read this article this morning that I think it was in Business Insider that talked about the housing crisis in the Bay Area that's been created by the tech giants. And they now have people that work at Google that are living in RVs. And when you think about it struck me that this was also a missed opportunity for HR because these workforces have been growing for a period of time, and we have all this technology around us, right? A lot of these companies are creating the technology that allows remote teams to work together. Why have we concentrated everybody in one area? We've created an ultra-competitive market in the Bay Area now, and we've made it impossible for people even to live. And then what is the impact on society when you can't have, police officers and drivers? So understand that everything you're doing is having an impact, and plan for your growth. Not everything has to be in one concentrated location. Where are the other places you can grow? Unfortunately, we're so reactive. We wait until we're in this situation before we say, where's the second office we're going to build? And so I do think that every company needs to start really turning HR into a proactive function in the company that's helping to think about how the company is best going to be served, how employees are going to live their lives well, and be and have a great experience not only professionally but also personally by living in the neighborhoods and being able to afford a home and all of that kind of stuff. So I do think that HR has to be much more proactive in planning the growth of the workforce and in general, planning, thinking through the experience of the employees, whether it's on the recruiting or the retention side, but also developing programs that are really driving business outcomes and helping the company get to where it needs to be. And I think that's a mindset shift that we need to see very quickly for companies to be able to survive this environment.
That's a great point. I've been saying for a long time, shift the perception of HR as a cost center to a profit center, and it will make a big difference because really HR can be strategic and should be at the table helping lead the way. And with that, we wanted to give you all some takeaways and basically a top 9 list of things you can take back and talk about with your teams. So I'd like to start with recruitment key takeaways. Amanda?
So like we talked about throughout the recruitment process, you really want to continuously sell the candidate on the opportunity, on the company, on your vision, on your benefits, on the overall company goals. This is something you should reiterate every step of the interview process because remember, they're most likely having similar conversations with other companies. If they aren't clear on what your company is all about, they may take another offer. We didn't talk a ton about compensation, but in this market, with this tight market, compensation is a big issue. You can do all the research that you want to find out what generally accepted market compensation is for a position. But if you're recruiting a candidate away from a job and they are already being paid market value, you're going to have to offer them more. It doesn't always have to be a lot more, but given some of the laws that David spoke about, you should ask the candidate what they are targeting and make them the best possible financial offer that you can. And again, there's ways to be unique with that. You can do deferred compensation. There's a lot of unique ways that you can create a competitive compensation package. And then last, just to reiterate, you always want to treat your candidates and employees like customers. You want to protect your reputation. You want to treat people as they are, human beings. They deserve respect and care. And the more that you can treat, especially candidates that are going through your interview process well, they can become walking billboards for your company. If they have a great experience, even if they don't get hired, that message will get sent out to the community.
Amanda, there was one question. Do you work with, and I'm paraphrasing, do you work with the companies or your clients to help them formulate questions they would ask and to identify what we're looking for, whether it's hard skills or soft skills?
I do, absolutely. And we didn't talk about this a lot, although I don't remember which one of you mentioned culture. I think that companies really need to focus on 2 things when they're interviewing candidates. First of all, what are we looking to accomplish in hiring this person, and can this candidate meet those accomplishments? And second is, are they a good cultural fit for our companies? So I think those are the 2 main things that you need to focus on when you're doing your interviews. And yes, if you do work with me, I actually help my clients come up with all the questions that they should ask in an interview process.
Gotcha. Thank you. Anything else in that, Sarah, or should we jump to retention?
I think I've shared enough. I'd love to hear what Annissa has to say.
Thank you. Okay, Annissa, it's all yours.
So I think we've hit on this theme quite a bit, but be authentic and amplify what's unique about your culture and really think about how you're going to differentiate yourself. Amanda is absolutely right that, you're going to have to deal with the compensation aspects of it. But one way to, kind of offset that is to have something that's really unique about your company that attracts people to come work for you. And then the second is Glassdoor is a Yelp of companies. And I know I've said this like 100 times. I probably sound like a broken record, but I can't emphasize this enough. You really want to encourage employees and candidates to leave thoughtful reviews so you're able to figure out what's working and what's not and take action on what's not. I mean, as Amanda said, when someone has a terrific experience, she told us that story of the retail environment. when someone has a terrific experience, they will say it everywhere, and you want that kind of feedback on your Glassdoor so that people understand, so that people know that you're that company that provides this amazing experience. And I think with low unemployment, it's so important to focus on the what's in it for me and the employee experience. I mean, I also read this morning that millennials have changed the game when it comes to products that they focus on the experience so much, and it's all about the experience to them. And so I think in the workplace, we need to start reflecting the experiences that we have at home, where we have all this technology enabling our lives very simply. We need to do that in the workplace as well, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to focus on making sure employees understand why we're asking them to do something, whether it's training or learning a new program, and make sure that we really focus on the experience and not just checking a box for a compliance reason.
Gotcha. Thank you. I do have one quick question for you. When you work with a company, can you walk through a little bit about what you might be asking early on so that you can come up with some suggestions and a plan for the company?
Yeah, so I actually have a service offering where I provide employees with an HR action plan where I interview some of the top executives, I identify some of the key organizational and team gaps, and then I come up with a list of actions to help them close those gaps. So these are both short-term actions that they can take, long-term strategies, and some quick wins. And of course, we'll have success measures. So it's a great assessment to kind of figure out how to set your strategy and start modernizing your HR, and also to ensure that your company can achieve its goals.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there anything else on your side, or should we jump to the next slide?
We can jump to the next slide.
Okay, it's time to talk about the legal side a bit. And one of the things that I felt was important is that we've got to train everyone involved in the interviewing process. I talked earlier, and we talked during the panel discussion a bit about what you can and cannot ask on interviews. The problem is sometimes we have a person in HR who interviews, or a recruiter, and then someone from the department also interviews a person, and that person needs to also understand what can and cannot be asked. So what I suggest we do is to prepare in advance a list of the questions that we want to ask people, and every candidate who comes in for an interview really should get all of the questions asked of that candidate, because let's suppose we've got one person who's 55 years old who's interviewing, and other people who are interviewing are all around 40. And we decide early on the 55-year-old is not going to be a good fit. And we may very well have a good reason for it. I'm not saying the reason is illegal per se, but if we don't ask all the questions of that candidate, and that candidate knows that they were in and out in 5 minutes, and they sat through other people who were in for 20 minutes, they're going to go to a lawyer. And for those of you who have been in prior webinars, the lawyer works for a firm called Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And they're going to call up that lawyer from Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe and say, I only got 5 minutes. I'm 55. The other people are all 40. They get 20 minutes. And that may very well be an age discrimination case. So that's an example of doing something that's a best practice for the business, because you come up with really good questions that you can ask people and do a great job interviewing, but you're also at the same time avoiding the risk of a claim being made against you. And the second thing is to review compensation and how promotions are handled, because sometimes people get the tap on the shoulder. And I think it was Amanda who talked about people gravitate like to like. People in tech companies talk to tech companies, HR to HR. But in organizations, sometimes people who happen to be of a certain gender or of a certain age group tend to hang out with people who are the same, and that person gets a tap on the shoulder to get a promotion into a higher position, and you're not getting the best talent in the position, you're getting the person you're familiar with in the position, and that is a recipe for disaster in a lot of ways, in retention, future recruiting. And then on the last point, we're at an age now where your pay bands, your promotions, your diversity, gender, race, ethnicity, national origin are all going to be under a microscope. And it's important that you take some time now to audit so that if come September, you populate the EEO-1 report, and if you find that you've got some problems or disparities, you could take steps to correct them or to determine whether or not there's a good reason for a disparity, like, for example, education, if it's relevant, programs for adjusting compensation for geography, for merit-based programs, things along those lines. If you've got a good faith basis for a difference in pay, you're fine. If you don't have a good faith basis, then you've got to make adjustments. Another thing is that oftentimes pay disparity happens when you've got rapid downsizing, a merger or an acquisition, and you're bringing in people from another company, and maybe a comparable position in your company pays $50 and the other company pays $70,000. You've got a $20,000 differential that you may need to correct in that situation. So those are times when you want to be thinking ahead. But in any event, I see that we're out of time, and I just wanted to thank you, Annissa and Amanda, for agreeing to chat with me for an hour on these topics. And you certainly are welcome to reach out to any of the three of us with questions that you've got. Our contact information is on the right-hand side of the page. Amanda, Annissa, thank you so much for joining in the program today.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Annissa.
Thanks.
Wishing you all a very good day. Take care.
Bye.